Aishmai, Setoiti, Croesioi, Christoi. What's cracking, boys and girls? Today we have a cheeky chat about Caverns of the Snow Witch, a fighting fantasy novel written by Ian Livingstone. So, let's go. Caverns of the Snow Witch was written sometime in the 80s and then published by Puffin. There's usually a 20-year gap between editions of the book, with it going from Puffin to being published then by Wizard, then Scholastic, and as a result, the covers change a little bit to keep up with the times. We've got 3 main editions, 3 separate covers, and unfortunately you're not meant to judge a book by its cover, but we do. It's fun, it's a little bit of banter. At the end of the day, the Puffin one is nice. It's a hand-drawn illustration depicting a scene in the actual book itself, and it features the Snow Witch herself, which is a main part of the book. If we go into the Wizard's version, it still has the Snow Witch on there, but she has the costume change to keep up with the times. And it's actually, it's a nice little cover. It's got a bit of eeriness to it, and I think it's quite effective. It actually shows you who the Snow Witch is this time. Last but not least, we've got the Scholastic version. It's very blue. Dabba-dee-dabba-die, there's a flipping Yeti on the cover. Doesn't look like a Snow Witch. You're not going to be tricked into thinking it's a Snow Witch. It's very obviously a blue Furby looking thing with horns and teeth and creepy little eyes. I don't like it. It doesn't look like a Snow Witch. And to be honest with you, it doesn't even look like the Yeti from the previous editions. I don't get it. Probably one of the weakest covers in my opinion. So if I had to pick my own favourite edition, it's probably going to be the Wizard edition, because that's the one I grew up with. Obviously, if you don't have any fighting fantasy books, it doesn't really matter. The Scholastic versions are readily available. You can get them off Amazon for like a tenner, maybe £7. And, it's a nice little read. But that doesn't matter, because what matters is what's in the stories themselves. So the meat and potatoes of these stories is obviously the journey that you go on itself, and the story that comes along with it, whether or not you're exploring an ancient ruin or whatever. With Caverns of the Snow Witch, you're mostly spending most of your time exploring the Snow Witch's caverns themselves. You're going from room to room through different corridors, meeting different characters, and it's all in all, it's a fun little adventure, So the adventure that you're going to be going on inside of this book is quite fun. It's quite interesting. There's 3 distinct parts, It's segmented very well, and each and every single part feels like maybe an episode of a series. You got a middle, beginning and end in each of the 3 parts, so it feels like you actually get a lot done throughout the story. So the story starts off with Big Son Jim hiring you to help protect his trading caravans as he goes to the north, collects goods and brings them back south to sell for a profit. Now the thing is, when you're travelling up north, you hear a hunting horn in the distance. Everybody sort of comes to the conclusion that it must have come from the northern trading camp. So he sends you up there to have a look, see what's happened, see if they need help, and see if you can actually provide any sort of assistance to them, because obviously he cares about his wares. So when you actually get to the trading outpost, you're met with Gorn Viscera. All the northerners have been killed, all their cabins have been destroyed, and it doesn't really look like a theft, It's mindless violence for the sake of mindless violence. There are no survivors, and you have this uneasy feeling as if you're being watched from the distance by something. You look around and all you can see are footprints leading in and around the little settlement. So you think to yourself, this is a bit dangerous, and you head on back to Big Son Jim. So it takes you some time to get back to the camp, but you tell Big Son Jim about it, and he's obviously worried. He sat there, he's thinking, damn, I need you to go out and hunt this creature, otherwise we're all just wasting our time here. So you gouge him out of 50 gold coins, and he doesn't like it, but he's thinking, well, I'm gonna make that money back anyway. So you go to bed happy, you're thinking about, gonna make some money, gonna hunt this creature down. So you wake up in the morning and you head off at sunrise. So this is really the start of the adventure now. You actually get to choose what you want to do, and you could die fairly early on if you make some poor dice rolls, but other than that, it's a very seamless adventure. You go from A to B. In this case, you go from the start to a hunter's cabin. You loot the cabin, or I think you can actually avoid looting it. You don't have to loot it. But then from the cabin, then you actually meet the hunter who lives there, and the creature he's been hunting, which also happens to be the creature you've been hunting. Now, if you've got the Scholastic version, unfortunately, this encounter is spoilt a little bit, but it is a Yeti. You're fighting a Yeti. The Yeti is pretty cool. There's a nice bit of build up towards it. It's quite atmospheric. It feels like a boss fight. And when you eventually do slay the Yeti, you head on over to the dying hunter, and he tells you about the Snow Witch. He's slaying her. He taps you on the shoulder. He's like, alright pal, you've just you stole my kill there. You didn't actually save me. I'm still dying. But you came in on last second to steal my glory. But I'm going to tell you about the Snow Witch. You didn't know about it beforehand. There's no way you would have known about it beforehand. So I'm going to tell you about her. I'm going to tell you about how rich she is. And you just sort of sit there and you think, well, yeah, this woman has a lot of money. She's got more than 50 gold. I'm actually going to go into her caverns and loot her. I'm going to rob her blind and then head on off. And maybe buy some vapes of all my money. You know, you're rich then. You got no worries. So that's exactly what you do. So then you leave this poor sod. He's just sort of laying there in the snow. You know, you're like, well, you know, he's gonna freeze off. He's gonna be like a popsicle at some point. Maybe a yeti's gonna eat them. You know, circle of life. You know, it's like Lion King. So you follow his directions and you actually find the entrance to the Snow Witch's caverns. You know, this hunter's left a bit of cloth there, and you later find out that the caverns are actually inhabited. So I don't know why there's a bit of cloth just left on the door. You know, it's a bit weird, but you know, it is what it is. So you find the caverns and you think, yeah, I'm gonna go in, and this is the build up then. This is the lead on to section 2. So I found section 2 to be quite annoying. You know, you're faced with a lot of right or left decisions. That's basically it. You know, when you first go and you meet an elf and you have 3 different choices. You can attack him, sneak past him, or talk to him. If you talk to him, he sort of makes it obvious he doesn't want to be there, you know. But either way, you go on and then you're just sort of wandering around these caverns, meeting funny little characters. You know, there's a minstrel, I like them. There's a gnome chef, I like him too. He gives you a stale cake. It heals you. But you know, what happens is then you eventually encounter the Snow Witch herself. The Snow Witch herself is pretty much the boss of this book. She is the big bad guy, and unfortunately there's literally no build up towards her. You know, you don't know who she is. She hasn't got any presence. You know, even in her own caverns, she doesn't really seem to have any presence. You know, it's just a cave and she lives in that cave. And all these people seem to be afraid of her, but why? You know, you don't actually know who she is. And then you encounter her, and then she still doesn't have a presence, you know? So the Snow Witch herself doesn't actually have any lore, it seems. You know, you don't actually know who she is, what she is, why she's the way she is. You just sort of, you're in her caverns, trying to get her money, you know? And this is really the downside of the book, you know? You're hunting down this woman, and there's no real purpose other than your own personal greed. And I thought that was quite weird. But you know, it is what it is. So when you actually fight the Snow Witch, you find out she's also a vampire. She's a Snow Witch vampire. And that's pretty cool. That's pretty interesting, you know. They could have really expanded on that, but they chose not to. So either way, you fight the Snow Witch. You have to pull out a stake at one point to get her. And then when she's expired, you just go on, you steal all of her loot. And that really is sort of the start of your process then, getting out of the caverns. You know, and then you meet up with an elf and a dwarf. You meet Red Swift the elf and Stubbs the dwarf. I like both characters, but neither of them really had much of a personality. But they just add a bit of company. So then you're not really on your own. You've got 3 of you. And yeah, you're travelling through the caverns then. And this bit really feels like filler. But then what you end up doing then, you encounter the Snow Witch again, but in a secondary form where she's in this this glass bowl, you know, and this is where the Puffin variant of the cover comes from. This is where you encounter, you realise she isn't actually dead. She's actually just in a secondary form, and she's basically just harassed this orc to death. But either way, you go through a second boss fight. It's sort of like a secondary stage after wandering these halls for like another hour or so. But now you have to play a game with her to get out of the caverns alive. She says, okay, you play this game with me and I'm going to let you go. You know, fair's fair, you've won, you get to go. But the catch is, she's making out the rules and you need 3 tokens. But the 1 token that you actually get handed to you on the way there is useless. If you try to play it, you instantly fail and you have to go back, which I find quite annoying. But at the end of the day, you hopefully finish this fight and then you get to leave the caverns behind you. End of. You, Red Swift and Stubbs are then on your way then out of the caverns. Now an honourable mention of section 2 is obviously going to be the Mind Slayer, you know, a Mind Flayer from D&D. It actually looks like a Mind Flayer in the art as well. It's really cool. I like that fight. But if you fight him, you also get a token that you need to use to beat the Snow Witch. So now, ladies and gents, you're on to the 3rd part of the story, which, oddly enough, your main objective is now to walk 2 grown men home. And they both live in separate villages, so you're walking them home twice, really. But it all makes sense later on. Now this is when you find out that Red Swift has actually cast a death spell on both you, him, and presumably Stubbs, but you've already walked Stubbs home. Stubbs has gone off now on his own adventure, and he's probably finding out, well damn, I'm dying. But what actually happens now is you have to find a healer now after Red Swift has died just in front of you. So you press F to pay respects to Red Swift, and now you're on your own adventure. Now you're also dying very slowly. It's like you've ingested this poison. And what you're going to find out now is that it's a race against time to find a cure. Otherwise, you got to go back to the lobby, game over. So really this is like the last 5 minutes of the story. You're trying to find a healer. And this healer is the only person in the entire world who can actually heal this death spell that Red Swift has in. So I'm finding out that Red Swift has actually accidentally cast a death spell on all of you guys. Your new objective is to find this one healer who can actually break that death spell, It's too late for Red Swift. We don't know about Stubbs. We don't really care, to be honest. He's gone. He's off, But you've got to survive. And what you find out now is that it's very much a race against time. You are losing health at this alarming rate. You do actually eventually find the healer, and he's like, pal, I've got this tedious little thing that you need to go through. If you don't go through this tedious little task, well, you're dead anyway. Lol bounce. But you do actually, hopefully, win, and you get healed of that spell. And then you just sort of sat there vibing on a mountain, looking at the sunrise, thinking, gosh darn, I am rich, and I'm no longer dying. And that's really how your adventure ends. So, yeah, that's the story, It's split into 3 parts, and each of the 3 parts really could have been their own book. It could have been like a nice little trilogy, but they chose not to. It's really, it is what it is at the end of the day. Now going on to something else that I never do, obviously you're allowed to play these with dice. You're given a stat sheet where you roll your own stats and you get to fight monsters by rolling dice. I personally don't do the combat, And it started when I was young, I just liked the story. I thought it was really cool. You get to see all these monsters, you get to loot stuff, you get to do all this cool stuff, But if you do actually play with dice, what you're going to find out is a lot of these fights are really quite difficult. Not only are they difficult, a lot of the time you do actually need a key item, either to avoid the fight or survive it. I think there's a crystal dude, and you need a warhammer to actually beat him, otherwise he just pummels you to death. And when you actually encounter the warhammer, the book says like, oh, that looks really heavy, it's going to ruin your fun, or something silly like that. So then you're like, well, I'm not going to pick this up, but you do actually need it, And this is really an ongoing thing, this book really does need you to collect as many items as possible. You might be looking at this thing, you might think, well, this isn't really that useful. Then you need it in the next encounter. At one point there's a mouse that turns into a dragon, and you need something obscure to throw at the mouse to stop him turning into this dragon, because the dragon will mess you up. Combat aside, I do actually really like the book. It's the first fighting fantasy book I picked up in a long time, and I read it and I enjoyed it. I read it in one sitting, but you can read it in 2 sittings, 3 sittings. It's up to you personally, and there's enough replay value where you can go back through the book and read through different scenarios that you didn't choose. It's good. So to round off this cheeky chat, if you came up to me in a pub, you slipped this book along the table and you're like, what do you reckon about this bad boy then? I'd be like, well, it's a good book, the adventure is fun, and the monsters you encounter are actually pretty cool. The Yeti fight is pretty memorable in my books, and the Snow Witch herself, although she lacks presence, she was a fun fight. I liked it, and I like the book, and I tell you straight, the book's pretty good. If you want to buy it, I reckon you should. So yeah, I recommend the book. I reckon you might like it, and if you're watching this thinking, well, that sounds interesting, get it. It's £10, £8. On eBay you can get the older editions, which are better, for about a tenner. Then on Amazon the newer editions about £8. So yeah, this is my first video. If you watched this far, I want to say thanks. I want to say thank you. And if you liked it, don't be afraid to like it. I'm thinking about doing a second video, seeing how this goes, and there's a bunch of other things that I want to try anyway. So yeah, thanks for coming. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a really, really nice day.